What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. The house I'm working on right now is a fairly modern build, at least by Indiana standards, and we are integrating drywall reveals with some of our casework and millwork. It's pretty challenging stuff, so in this video I'm going to walk you through how to achieve that, how I went about it. Not that I have everything figured out with this, but I'm pretty pleased with the approach that I took. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of getting a reveal detail like this and how you can go about it. Now, in the case of this home, the design architect specified in a few different areas that we are to install this 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch reveal detail. I didn't get any information past that in terms of what trim we are to use or how we are to go about it. And that's kind of how I prefer it to be. I would prefer to figure that out and figure out the best approach myself. But that was the goal. We wanted this 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch reveal detail. So how do we go about getting that? So the first thing we've got to do is figure out which drywall trim bead is going to be best for the task at hand. Now there's a wide variety of different trims. Not really that many to choose from, but I should say there's a wide variety of types of trim in terms of price points and the material it's made out of. What I ended up selecting was this Trimtex Z-BEAD. Now I know you can get Fry Reglet and some other brands that are actually metal beads. They're significantly more expensive. So if you're doing a big job that's got a lot of linear feet, there's a big price delta between a plastic bead like this and a metal bead. I decided to go with the plastic bead. It wouldn't have broke the bank to go with a metal bead on this job, but I was also learning this for future jobs where we might have more linear feet of this to run. I know some other builders who use this quite a bit, and I wanted to get practiced up with it. This is the Trimtex bead that we're using. As you can see here, it's got a 1/2 inch depth, and then my side flange right here is 3/4 of an inch. But if we want a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch reveal, why would we get 3/4 right here? Well, that's because we want to integrate this trim bead with a kerf detail on our casework. So that extra 1/4 inch of space will give us room to slide this into a kerf detail so that we have some adjustability, and it'll also lock it in to our casework. The next thing I had to figure out was, how am I going to build this casework and jam material? I needed this detail to integrate into a built-in bookshelf unit, as well as some deep cased openings. I'm going to call them cased openings or paneled openings that would connect different spaces in the house. So I knew that we were targeting a look that would give us 1.5 inches of thickness here, and that meant I pretty much either was going to have to attach hardwood nosing to plywood, or I was going to need to miter fold plywood around and go with that approach. I ended up going with the miter fold approach, which you can see here. We've got a nice miter fold, and then the Z-Trim integrates into the kerf like so. That worked really well. I know some of you guys who have access to really nice edge banders would have probably just built up your plywood, cut it off square, and then put edge banding on the face of this. I don't have a good quality edge bander like that, and I definitely don't trust iron-on edge banding very much, so I think the miter fold approach was the right approach for me. Now let's talk about our kerf design. Now, the kerf does not have to be anything special. You can run that kerf on a table saw, you can run it with a track saw, you could even run it with a router bit. It would be a little hard on this because it's 1 3/16 inches in off the face, so it would take a pretty long shank on your router bit to make it work. But I did actually have to do that on the job site because I forgot to put the kerf on my head jam piece, and so I had to route it in place on one side. Anyways, it can be done, but I wouldn't recommend it. you've got to keep in mind that you're working with very imperfect framing in a lot of cases. I had some really large passage openings that were over basically 30 inches wide. And whenever you've got something like that, you've got multiple framing components, and the width on those is not going to be perfect. So if you put your kerf on your casework and you don't take that into account, that there's variability there, you could have some serious problems. Other times, for example, like where you might be doing it on a door jamb, you should have pretty consistent width because it's just one framing member that you're aligning with. But the wider you get, the more variability you have. So the strategy that I'm using is to basically, I'll run the kerf on the table saw in certain scenarios when I can, but then whenever I know I need adjustability on the job site, I'll put my casework in place, mark it with a pencil line in place, and then I'll put my kerf exactly where it needs to be so that my drywall trim will terminate, boy, if I can get it turned right, will terminate where it needs to, and I don't have it all tilted and stuff like that. In this case, my kerf location was dictated by my baseboard detail. And essentially the goal was to have my baseboard, the face of my baseboard, flush out with the face of my casework that I'm installing with this drywall detail. So my baseboard I knew was 5/8 thick, and I was gonna plan for about a 1/16 of mud buildup, could probably even go an 1/8 if you wanted to, and then add another 1/2 inch for drywall. That meant that to the front of my kerf cut, I made it 1 3/16 inches back off of the face, and that turned out to be about right. Now, an important design note is in order to install this Z-Trim, you're gonna need space between your casework or your jamb and where your drywall ends. Now, if you've got framing material and usually your drywall is routed flush with your framing material, there's a couple different ways you can do this. One is you can just add 5/8 inch of shim so that your casework moves off of this drywall edge about 5/8 of an inch, and that'll give you enough room to slide your Z-Trim in and install it. The other thing you can do is just install your casework, plumb it and straighten it like you typically would with a door jamb, and then after it's installed, you can go back and mark a 5/8 space line along here to give you your 5/8 margin, and then cut the drywall back 5/8 of an inch. Sometimes that is the better strategy, especially if you've got openings that are gonna be out of plumb, because for example, let's say this opening was out of plumb and I ended up kicking this in quite a bit, I could end up with 1 inch gap right here, and then that's not quite as ideal to secure the drywall bead to. Hopefully that makes sense. Point being, there's a couple different ways you can tackle this, but the one thing you need is that 5/8 gap right here between your casework and the start of your drywall to install that Z-bead. Let's talk about a couple other design elements that we had to consider with this detail. One was, what is the finished color going to be inside of our channel? So obviously this trim bead is white already. Now, I've heard of different people actually painting the inside of this channel black so that it's actually got a black reveal all the way through there. That creates a lot of problems. One, we would need to pre-finish all this trim material black or order aluminum trims that are already black. But if you can imagine, if your wall color is white and you're painting the inside of this channel black, you would have to perfectly cut that black to white transition line all the way up the edge on this corner. And the odds of that executing well and looking good are just not very good at all. and it's going to be an insane amount of work for the painter. So as a general rule, it makes sense to carry your wall color through your reveal channel also. Typically, your wall colors in a modern home that's going to be white or some kind of an off-white, you're going to just paint that inside of this channel the same color, and it's not going to be too big of a deal that way. Also keep in mind the whole purpose of this 1/2-inch channel is to create shadow lines. And even with it being painted the same color as the wall, you are still going to get that darker shadow line detail there. It's not like it's all just going to disappear and flatten out. If it's painted that same color, you're still going to get a shadow, and it's still going to make your detail pop like it's supposed to. The other question we had to address was with our baseboard. Again, we wanted our baseboard to flush out with the front of the casework we were installing, but then it became the question of, well, do we butt our baseboard up to the casework like that? That creates this weird scenario where you've got this hole back behind here, and with flushing it out, it just doesn't really look that good. If I was to butt my baseboard up to the casework, I would have preferred to give the casework about another 1/4 inch of depth. That way we actually had a reveal there. But what we opted to do was to keep our baseboard back so that it will terminate with the inside edge of our drywall reveal detail, and then we'll just miter return our baseboard like so. That way that reveal detail carries all the way down to the floor. So that's kind of an overview on what you're going to see on this house in a future installation video, and we'll dig into the nitty-gritty of actually installing this casework on a future video. The last note that I want to give you is about pricing. You have got to be ready. If you're going to do these details, you have to put an appropriate labor number on it, because this stuff is time consuming. And if you don't take the proper time to execute this kind of detail well, it is going to be a disaster. So don't go for the cheapest bid on something like this. And if you're the installer like I am, and you haven't done this before, beware. It takes a long time to do it well, and be prepared that it's going to take longer than you think. Personally, I'm glad that I'm kind of slowly transitioning into this type of work with a few details here and there where I can get my feet wet a little bit. But my goodness, I cannot imagine if I was asked to bid a whole house where I needed to do this detail on all the doors and with recessed baseboard, it would be a big number. I can tell you that right now. And if you try to go about it where we're going to wham bam slam this stuff out, now you've got an issue where the finished product is not going to look good, and that becomes a huge liability in and of itself. So if you're a builder, beware. You've got to hire guys who can execute this kind of work well, put the proper number on it, and be prepared that not everybody, actually I would say very few clients are actually going to be willing to pay for this type of work at a level of execution that it deserves. So hopefully this video helped you guys understand a little bit of some options that you have with integrating a Trimtex Z-BEAD into your casework. In the next video, I'll be showing you the actual installation process of some of the casework that I did on this house, as well as the installation of the Z-Trim. One other note worth mentioning is, yes, in my case, I, the trim carpenter, am going to install these Z-Trims. I am not going to give that to the drywaller to come in and do. It takes so much work and planning to get my casework exactly where it needs to be. I'm not going to risk having a drywaller come in to install this stuff and get the reveals wrong or do who knows what else. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next video where we'll start installing some of this stuff.